Hey, what's up? Today, we are going to read an article together, and I will explain some of the words that you might not know. This article will be about the famous groundhog that predicts the weather in Pennsylvania. Let's go over the words that you need to know before we read. First, predict. To predict or a prediction. To predict is to say what you think will happen in the future, and a prediction is the statement itself. For example, the weatherman predicted rain this Thursday, but it was a sunny day. His prediction was wrong. Number 2, a brutal stretch of. This means a long, difficult, or painful period of time. For example, it was a brutal stretch of cold weather, 2 weeks straight of below zero. The next word is shadow. A shadow is the darkness that's created when something blocks light. For example, the man walked with a shadow behind him. The next word is despite, and it's a little hard for me to define. It's weird. It's a weird word, but I would say it's something like, even though something shouldn't have happened, it happened. So for example, despite the rain, they went for a walk. The next word is seasonal. If you know the word seasons, like winter, spring, summer, and fall, then you can kind of already understand this word. For example, pumpkins are a seasonal food. At least in the United States, pumpkins are normally only eaten around October. The next phrase is to trace one's roots, which means to research, to find out about the origin of yourself or your family, culture, etc. For example, she did a DNA test and traced her roots back to Ireland. The next word is lore, which means a traditional story or traditional stories passed down through generations in a particular culture. For example, according to local lore, a ghost haunts that bridge. And lastly, a legend, which has 2 definitions, one being a traditional story, often heroic or supernatural, and the second one being an admired person. For example, the legend of Zelda, or Muhammad Ali was a legend. With these words in mind, let's start reading this article now, and we'll see how much of it you understand. All right. So, on the heels of a brutal stretch of bitter cold, that means that it had just happened. We're at the end of a brutal stretch of cold. As we mentioned, a stretch is a long amount of time, and brutal is really bad. Punxsutawney Phil is the name of the groundhog that we're talking about. And he has predicted another 6 weeks of winter. He thinks that another 6 weeks of winter are to come after seeing his shadow early Monday morning, which is how they gauge whether he's predicting a longer winter or an early summer. Despite the cold, thousands of people gathered at Gobbler's Knob in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, to celebrate Groundhog Day and watch Phil emerge from his stump and make his prediction for 2026. So remember how we said despite means something like something shouldn't have happened, but it did. Well, in this context, we can see that despite the cold, even though it was cold, thousands of people gathered. So they shouldn't really have gathered. You wouldn't think they would, but they did. So despite the cold, thousands of people gathered. Now, they came to watch Phil emerge, to come out of his stump like his dwelling place where he lives, his house, and make his prediction. So to tell people what he thinks the weather is going to be like in the near future. The seasonal celebration began around 3 a.m. before Dom Dunkel, president of Groundhog Club's Inner Circle, knocked on Phil's burrow 3 times to coax him out. To coax him out means to convince him to come out of his house. After Dunkel spoke Groundhogese with Phil, Vice President Dan McGinley read the scroll containing Phil's prediction. It is my job this February 2nd to look to the skies and report back to you that there is a shadow here on my ground. 6 more weeks of winter abound. Okay, a lot to break down there. So Groundhogese obviously is a made-up language, like Japanese, Chinese. He's saying that he spoke groundhog language to this groundhog, Phil. He spoke Groundhogese. So now he says that there is a shadow here on my ground. 6 more weeks of winter abound. That means 6 more weeks of winter is to come, essentially. Abound is to come. And there's the little guy right there. So let's read what is Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day traces its roots to the Christian holiday of Candlemas Day, when Christians would take their candles to church to have them blessed for the rest of the winter, according to the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club. Eventually, lyrics in an English folk song connected the holiday to the weather. A fair and bright Candlemas meant more winter. Clouds and rain signaled the season's end. German lore, remember how we talked about lore? It's like their cultural stories. German lore brought in the animal connection, where if a hedgehog saw its shadow on Candlemas Day, 6 more weeks of winter were on the way. When German settlers arrived in the United States, they brought with them the same legend, though in America, that animal evolved from a hedgehog to a groundhog. In modern-day Gobbler's Knob, Groundhog Day is a celebration of the legend that put Punxsutawney on the map. All right, a lot to break down there. So, the same legend. So this is like using the word legend to talk about a very famous story or person. And then you see that they use it again here. It's a celebration of the legend that put Punxsutawney on the map. To put something on the map is to make many people aware of it. For example, if nobody from your hometown has ever been famous, and then you become famous, you are putting your town on the map because people will ask, where was he from? They'll find your town, and then they'll know about it. So that's what it means to put a place on the map. It's to make it known. Now let's see, how often is Punxsutawney Phil right? If you use Groundhog Day to decide whether or not the snow boots stay close, whether or not you should keep your snow boots close, you might want to consider another weather prediction source to consider, to ponder, to think about using another weather source. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Punxsutawney Phil's predictions were right about 30% of the time in the last 10 years. Not very good. So his predictions, when he said that something would happen, he was only right 30% of the time. Since he started making predictions, records show that Phil has predicted more winter 109 times, and in early spring 28 times, the most recent year being 2024. The NOAA even says Phil was spot on in his forecast 2 years ago. The contiguous United States saw above average temperatures that February and March. Is there a weather predicting groundhog more accurate than Phil? Apparently, yes. In 2025, the NOAA took a look at 19 groundhogs and alternative groundhogs from around the country who've been famous for their own weather predictions to see who has the most accurate track record. A track record is essentially your history, how well you have done in the past is what they're saying. So how well these groundhogs have done in their predictions. so their track record. The critters in competition had to meet the following criteria. They had to follow the description that you're about to see. They've been prognosticating for at least 20 years, which means they've been predicting for 20 years. And they were active prognosticators as of February 2nd, 2024. Again, prognosticators means predictors. They were predicting. This is not a word that you will see often, so don't worry about it. According to the NOAA, Staten Island Chuck, aka Charles G. Hogg of the New York City Staten Island Zoo, is the most reliable weather predicting groundhog with an 85% accuracy rate. In comparison, Punxsutawney Phil's 35% accuracy rate landed him in 17th place, only ahead of Michigan's Woody the Woodchuck and a tourist from Nevada named Mojave Max. So there you have it, guys. In my home state, like many in my country, we predict the weather using groundhogs, and it is a yearly celebration. And even though we know that Punxsutawney Phil is almost always wrong, we're very proud of him, and we love having him, and it's always a good time. I hope that you learned some vocabulary and that you found this kind of interesting. This was my first time doing a read with me video, so I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, let me know in the comments so that I know to make more. Leave a like for Punxsutawney Phil. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.